Welcome to Bridges KLC TV, coming to you live from the NTM studio. My name is Connell, and I'm your host today. And I have with me a wonderful guest, Ann Bisay. Welcome, Ann.
Well, thank you, Karen. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so excited for Ann to be here and to tell you a little bit about herself. She is a life coach, she's a mentor, a speaker, and an author. And she has so many resources for the community. But before we begin to unpack all those treasures, I'd like you to tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, just the personal Ann Bisay. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
I can. I'm a bit of a melting pot, Karen.
Okay.
I was born in northern New York State, up in the cold tundra, which we refer to it. I'm actually a small town girl. I was born in a town with more cows than people.
Oh, wow.
And so when we moved to the big city, where there was not a single cow, it was a big life change for me. So my dad, his family came out of South Carolina before the Civil War. So I claimed my South Carolina roots as home because I enjoy being warm much more than I do cold. I've traveled throughout all over the United States, parts of Europe, and I settled here. I found home here in Georgia twice, actually. I didn't realize it was home and I left, but then I came back. So in my process of travels, Karen, I discovered that I was really running. I was running away from things because I didn't understand who I was. I didn't understand my place in the world. So over my lifetime, I have acquired several names. I'm a mom and a stepmom. I'm a wife and an ex-wife. I'm a grandmother and a step-grandmother. My grandkids call me Mimi. And let's see, I'm a sister and a friend. So that's kind of all the different hats that I wear in my life. I love to read. I'm an avid reader. I struggle with gardening. I'm a frustrated dancer, and I sing off key really well. I do that really, really well. But I love to be outdoors. Free time for me is hiking, camping, kayaking especially. We have a new pop-up camper, so we will be doing much more of that now. So most days you can find me in my yoga pants and a t-shirt, just relaxing and laughing with my very witty English husband, Terry. So when I'm not relaxing in my yoga pants, I'm writing and I do a little bit of speaking around.
Awesome. Now you mentioned running, that you did a lot of running. And would you mind just sharing a little bit more about that? What do you mean by you did a lot of running?
Yeah, well, I grew up feeling unsafe in my environment. And it was my perception. I wasn't, but it was my perception. And so if I felt threatened and unsafe, then I would run to another place, another part of the country, to Europe, which apparently isn't far enough because you can't run away from God's call on your life, fortunately. So in the process of finding who I am, I developed a real passion for helping others find hope in their circumstances and love the life they're living. So, you know, Karen, there's a story in the Bible about two men, and Jesus tells this story, and he tells us of how one man built his house on sand, and the other man built his house on a rock, and the rain fell and the wind blew and this storm hits, and the house that was built on the sand fell because it didn't have a strong foundation. But Jesus says the house that was built on the rock stood firm through the storm. And he says that that house stood firm because it was built on the rock, because that man followed Jesus' teachings. He understood them and he followed them. And that story really resonated in my heart because for so many years, all the storms in my life, you know, those things that happen that really we take a hit on in our heart and our soul and we get discouraged, those storms would hit and my life would just collapse. And I got tired of that. So I looked at that story and I realized that while I knew a lot about the Bible, I didn't really believe what it was saying. I didn't understand its implication for me personally.
Well, now, okay, so you've just said a mouthful right there. Let's just back up for a little bit. So the running in your life that you were talking about in your personal life was before you had that understanding of Jesus in that more personal way and what his word was actually saying for you. Thus the traveling around the world, and which is also a blessing in one sense as a resource now that you can draw upon in your own life. I mean, how fabulous to have been able to go to so many different places. And even I love God's redemption, because even though we might be running for the wrong reasons, we might be going somewhere for the wrong reasons because we're afraid, God can still use those things, and he can catapult them into our futures with real purpose and real destiny, which I know personally with you, Anne, that happens over and over again. So I like the story that you're using as we're talking about the personal Anne, and I know this flows into the professional Anne also, but I like the story you're using about the man who built the house either on the sand or the rock. And it really is, when we get hit by those things in life, we can run, but eventually we will cave in, won't we? We'll just implode under the pressure of it. But then you move to the rock. And from moving to the rock, as you discovered Jesus, and I want you to pick this up here. I know your story, but I want our viewers to know your story. This also leads into the professional Anne, the ministry that was birthed out of your journey. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Okay. So really, Karen, it doesn't take long to move from the sand to the rock. It really was, that was a quick journey. It took me a while to make the move, but it was a relatively quick journey. And once I got there, everything changed, and sort of metaphorically speaking, the sun came out, and I felt peace in my heart. I was comfortable with who I am. And about that same time, shortly after that, I met my husband, and we were married, and I was afforded the opportunity to really explore what I wanted to do with this half of my life. And the thing that made sense to me was to replicate my journey and the process of moving from the sand to the rock for other people.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love the simplicity of that, and I love, you know what it reminds me of? You said you grew up in the north. I did too. And do you remember when those heavy snowfalls would come? And when you were little, you would get lost in the snow, but Grandma or Grandpa would go out in front of you, or Mom or Dad, and they'd say, just step where I've stepped. And as a little one, you could actually make it through the snow by following the footprints of the one in front of you. And so that's kind of what you're talking about. When you talk about replicating the journey, you're saying to somebody who's looking on, just step where I've stepped. This is how you go from the sand to the rock. Tell me more.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the snow, because I can remember climbing a tree in the winter, and several feet of snow on the ground, and jumping off the tree into the snow and getting stuck. And I remember the only way I got out, and I remember this because my siblings or my friends, someone pulled me up this way, up out of the snow, and my boots stayed in the holes.
Those little plastic boots,
those little
plastic red boots.
So really, that's a great metaphor, because that's really what some people need sometimes, is when they're stuck, just for somebody to just pull them out of that and step, like you said, in the footsteps. So a big part of my transition and moving from the sand to the rock was understanding that I was uniquely made. Now, I know there are lists and lists and lists of scriptures that tell us who we are in Christ, but I also came to understand that I am a unique creature, that I'm uniquely made. There's a verse that says that we were knit together in our mother's womb. And what that means to me is that at the moment I was conceived, God showed up with the blueprints for my life, with the DNA plans, and literally knit together my DNA because he knew from the beginning of time what my life was going to be like. So he knew the ingredients that I was going to need. So discovering that I was uniquely made and understanding that that includes my personality and my very quirky sense of humor.
Which I happen to enjoy quite a bit.
Indeed. I realized that all those things were there on purpose to accomplish the works that Christ had planned for us, for me individually. So I could look at who I am, my personality, my communication style, my passions, my sense of humor, my life experiences, those things that made me run, but like you said, that afforded me the opportunity to experience different cultures. All those things really pointed to a purpose in my life.
So, okay, purpose. That's another big word.
That's a big word.
It's just 2 syllables, but it's a big word. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah.
Purpose.
Yeah. See, I think Paul really nailed it in his letters when he said that we're members of one body, that we all have a function. And if I'm a thumb, then I know that I'm a thumb, then I know my purpose is to be attached to the hand, and I have a specific function. And the thumb is next to the hand and not, on the side of the cheek or on the leg or somewhere, because it wouldn't function there. So the thumb really knows it's a thumb, and it knows what its job is, which is really to assist the fingers, right? Which gives it purpose, and it also helps it to understand that it wasn't meant to be a nose. It wasn't meant to be an elbow. It was meant to be a thumb. So it's confident in its thumbness and its purpose in life. So it not only gives itself freedom to be who it was created to be, but it helps it find its place in the rest of the body.
Absolutely. And then it doesn't take the place of somebody else.
It does, yeah.
Which I like that. As you were describing it, the reason why I chuckled, I was imagining a thumb coming out my ear or a thumb coming out my nose, and I'm like, yeah, that just wouldn't look right, and it wouldn't function properly.
Yeah.
But then it would displace my ear, and it would displace my nose. And we don't need to do that because we need the ear. We need the nose to do what the nose does, and the ear to do what the ear says. So purpose is not that complicated. It's very simple. It's simply, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's simply understanding who we really are and why we are here.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely huge. As I mentioned in my metaphor, the thumb knows it's a thumb, and it knows it needs to be attached to the hand. So when you know who you are and what your purpose is, then you know where you need to be attached to. Are you familiar with the 7 mountains of culture?
I am, but I don't know that our viewers are.
So every culture in history and in any part of the world has 7 foundational structures to it. It has a government structure, a family structure, education, a business, finance, trade, a family structure, entertainment structure, and a media arts structure. So all those things contribute to every culture throughout history. So if the thumb knows it's a thumb, and it knows its job is, to pick things up, to transport things, to transport food to the mouth, then it knows it needs to be attached to this hand. So the thumb knows, in essence, which part of the body it belongs to, and we can, in the same way, know which part of culture that we belong to, which one we're sort of called to, and we kind of know that from our passions. Our passions give us real clues into where we're called into society. The interesting thing about the thumb, Karen, is it solves a lot of problems.
Yes, it does.
Doesn't it?
I love my thumb.
I love my thumb because it really, it solves a lot of problems. And our purpose in our culture and in our communities is really to solve problems. So when we think about, like, we're called to maybe education, we're called in there to bring solutions to problems in that area of society.
Awesome. So then you're alluding to, and you already said it, that then if we know who we are, we know what our purpose, why we are here, then we know who we're supposed to be attached to. Yes. And I love your illustration about the thumb, because the thumb knows just by what the thumb is, and it knows its purpose, that it is supposed to be attached to the hand and assist the fingers.
Yeah. Which
is so simple. And yet we complicate it when it comes to our lives. And if we will take the time to get to know who we are, why we're here, then we'll know where we belong, who we are supposed to be attached to, and what we are supposed to be doing when we're attached in order to solve a problem.
Right.
When Jesus came, he solved a problem.
Oh, a big problem.
Yeah, sin and separation from the Father. And so, I mean, that is just, I love what you said, and you did it in such a simplistic way, but that's part of the strength of what you do, Anne. As a coach and as a mentor, as a speaker, you take things that seem so complicated, but they're so important to everyday life for us to really get God, to walk out our relationship with God. And you really break this down for individuals. Talk to me a little bit about how the nuts and bolts of what you do.
I love the nuts and bolts because it keeps it simple.
Yes.
The first thing that I would say is I took all the tools that were my resources for helping me move from the sand to the rock and kind of put them in a workshop type format so that I could easily walk people through in a way that builds one upon the other. And the first thing that we always start with is Scripture, because that's the foundation of who we are. But Karen, did you know that those favorite verses that you have in your head and in your heart, did you know that they hold clues to who you are and your unique identity and your purpose?
Okay, so I love treasure hunts, I love mysteries, so please unpack this.
This was, when I learned this changed my life. This was the beginning of the big building block of this. And what I learned was I could go to the scriptures that I always loved, like my parable of the two men who built their homes on the sand and the rock. And I looked at that and I thought, well, okay, who is Jesus talking to? And he was talking to his followers, and I'm a follower, so that includes me. And I thought, well, okay, well, where is he and who is he talking, what's he talking about? And I had to go all the way back 2 chapters to find the beginning of his discussion. And in that very beginning, we're in Matthew chapter 5 with this, I read a very short verse that almost knocked me out of my chair. And it said, "You're the salt of the earth." Matthew 5:13 and 14.
Yes.
And it stopped me dead in my tracks.
Wow.
And you and I have talked about this because salt, well, so I thought, well, that's beautiful, but what does it mean? So I had to really research what salt is. And as I looked into what salt is, I realized that the function of salt is to preserve the integrity of food, in this case, and also to bring out the flavor, to bring out the best. And as I prayed, I really felt like God showed me that my primary purpose in life is to bring out the best in other people, to help preserve who people are, who God made them to be. And so that made so much sense to me, because my heart has always been as an encourager, but I didn't understand that that was intentionally in my DNA, that God had placed that there. And so I have a little sign over my desk that says, "Stay salty."
To remind you.
To remind me.
Of who you really are and your purpose.
Yeah.
That one little sign, it reminds you of who you are. It reminds you of your purpose.
Yeah.
And it tells you who to be attached to, those that God brings for you to encourage.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And then what you're to do is to help solve the problem, help them see who they are.
So from the scripture, then we build on some hard data like personality patterns, communication styles, because some people are big picture thinkers and some are detail oriented. And you know, my mother would say, never the two shall meet. But we try to teach people how to communicate, you know. So then we address things like spiritual gifts, which is hard data, abilities and skills, passions. All these things kind of come together. Oh, love languages is another big one. And they form a more clear picture of who God created us to be individually, and they start to reveal purpose that He might have on our life, the calls that He might have on our life.
Okay, and so you do this in your coaching and mentoring.
Yes.
And you also do speaking. So I know you do workshops and conferences, so talk to me a little bit about that also.
Oh, well, you know that in the last couple of years I've done some rather large conferences. Large for me. They were both designed primarily to connect people with the heart of Jesus for who they are, so that they can experience that place where they come alive. Because that's really what it's all about, is coming alive inside, finding hope in circumstances and loving the life they're living. So conferences is a great way to capture a group of people and just really give them a safe place to dig into some of these ideas and processes and encourage them and give them some momentum and tools for going forward.
I was recently part of your latest conference, which was the Come Alive Conference, Created to Create, and maybe you can just take a minute to describe that and some of the lasting fruit that has come from that.
Yes, and that was a lot of fruit. The primary purpose behind that conference was to help women connect with Jesus through creative play, creative exploration, creative play, to discover a little bit more about who they were created to be. Now, Karen, it says in Genesis 1, verse 1, that we are created in God's image. And then later in that very same chapter, he says, and God created man. So we are created in God's image, and the first thing He created was man. So we have to be creative. And so this conference was about finding that creativity. Now, I have to tell you, I took painting classes and all sorts of, hand lettering and all these things, and I was a fail. I just don't have, I can't sing on key, I can't paint and have it be something you'd want on your wall. But what God showed me and what led us to put together that conference was my creative flow isn't in the fine arts.
Oh.
It's in creating environments and events for people to find freedom, to experience Jesus, to encounter Him in life-changing ways, and to be set in a new course toward their purpose and their destiny in peace and in joy. So that's where my creative flow is. And I'm constantly thinking, let's do that, let's do that. And I have you and some people in my life to kind of keep me tethered down so I don't overextend myself. Because that's my creative flow. So what I learned was creativity isn't limited to painting or singing or hand lettering.
Although you provided that for people to explore, and I know for myself that when I explore those creative functions, it flows into other areas of my life.
Yeah.
Folks, I hope you have enjoyed getting to know Ann Bise, and I want to encourage you to check out her website at www.annbise.com, where you can find some of these wonderful resources, and you can get in touch with Ann. Thank you for joining us today.